I'm about to share something with you that will sicken anyone who has a speck of human decency. For a decade of my life, the person I loved most in this world, the one I nurtured so carefully, the one I brought into this life with so much pain and joy, this very person violated me daily. I was paralyzed, unable to even lift my left arm to fight back. My own son raped me for 10 long years. The worst part is, he did it all while pretending to be my loving caretaker. It sounds like something from a movie, a horror film, but it happened right here in Augusta, Georgia, in my own home, under the same roof where I raised him, believing I had raised a good man. My name is Abigail Davies. I'm 72 years old and a resident of Augusta, Georgia. People who see me now selling my herbal remedies at the local farmers market, with my small stall full of healing plants, chatting with customers, and giving advice about teas and tinctures, they can't even begin to imagine the hell I endured. Folks just know me as Miss Abby of the Herbs, that smiling lady with a kind word for everyone who's hurting. But behind that smile lies a story I kept buried for so long, until I finally decided I couldn't be silent anymore. Before I continue with this difficult tale, tell me in the comments what your name is and where you're listening from. I want to know who these brave souls are, the ones with the courage to hear the unvarnished truth of life. Because this story I'm about to tell isn't for just anyone. It will affect you in ways you might not be ready for. But I have to tell it, because I know there are other women out there going through what I did, and maybe, just maybe, my courage will give them the courage they need too. Every single word I'm speaking is true. Every detail actually happened, and if you stick with me to the end, you'll understand why it took me so long to find the strength to share this. My life wasn't always about plants and natural remedies. I worked at a textile factory here in Augusta, sewing all day to earn every penny I could to raise my son on my own. The factory was in the industrial district, a huge noisy building where hundreds of women were hunched over sewing machines all day, making clothes we could never afford for ourselves. Leo's father left me when he found out I was pregnant. He said he didn't want the responsibility, that he was too young to be a father. He was a handsome boy from a good family who filled my head with promises and then vanished the moment he saw things were getting real. I was only 19 when Leo was born, but I was determined to raise that boy with so much love and give him everything I never had in my own childhood. My own mother died when I was little. My father was a tough man who never knew how to show affection. I swore to myself my son would be different, that he would grow up knowing he was loved, and that he would have all the opportunities I missed out on. Looking back, I think that very love, that excess of it, is what ultimately spoiled him. It made him believe he could do anything to me. I worked like a beast for over 20 years in that factory. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning, make breakfast, set out lunch for Leo to heat up when he came home from school, and take 2 buses to get to work before 7 a.m. The factory was hot and stuffy, filled with fabric dust and chemicals. I'd spend all day hunched over the sewing machine, doing the same thing thousands of times a day. It was work that left my back aching, my eyes strained and my fingers stiff from pressing the machine. I would get home at 6 in the evening, completely exhausted, but I still had to make dinner, help Leo with his homework, do laundry, clean the house, and get everything ready for the next day. It was a routine that broke me down inside, but I endured it all, thinking about my son's future. On weekends, when I wasn't doing chores, I'd take him to the park, buy him ice cream, and try to give him the childhood I never had. I saved every last penny to buy him school supplies, nice clothes, and new shoes as his feet grew. Leo was an affectionate boy. Or at least that's what I believed then. He helped me around the house, swept the yard, took out the trash, told me he loved me, and promised that when he grew up, he would take care of me. Those words gave me the strength to keep working so hard every day. I dreamed of the day he would graduate, get a good job, and we could finally have a more peaceful life. It never occurred to me that inside the boy I was raising with so much sacrifice, a monster was growing. That all the affection I was giving him was being twisted in a sick way. In school, Leo was always an average student. He wasn't a top student, but he never caused any trouble for his teachers. He was quiet, obedient, and did his assignments without complaint. I went to all the parent-teacher conferences, spoke with his teachers, and always heard he was a polite, respectful boy. No one ever had a bad word to say about him. He never had any behaviour problems. So I was at ease. I thought I was raising him the right way, that I was on the right path. When he turned 18, I started noticing strange changes in his behaviour. First, it was the way he looked at me. He would stare at me differently, especially when I was getting changed or coming out of the shower. They were lingering looks that made me uncomfortable, but I tried to ignore them. Sometimes I felt like someone was watching me when I was in my room or the bathroom, but when I went to check, he'd be far away watching TV or on his phone. I told myself it was all in my head, that I was just getting paranoid from working so much. He also started becoming more clingy, more affectionate in a way that wasn't normal between a mother and an adult son. He always wanted to hug me. He would give me kisses on the cheek that lasted longer than they should. He was always finding excuses to lean against me, to touch me. When I was cooking in the kitchen, he would come up behind me and hug me, pressing his body against mine in a way that made me feel strange. When I complained, he just laughed and said he was just being affectionate, that I couldn't even stand a hug from my own son. One time he said he wanted to give me a massage because I looked so tired from work. I let him, thinking it was a son's affection, but his massage was weird. His hands started on my shoulders as they should have, but then they moved down my back to the side of my body, getting too close to my breasts. When I said something about it not being right, he laughed and said I was overreacting, that he was just trying to ease my tension, that I was seeing something sinister where there was nothing. Things got worse gradually, in such a subtle way that it took me a while to understand what was happening. He started coming into my room without knocking, always with some excuse. He'd say he wanted to ask me something about school, or that he was looking for something he had lent me, or that he wanted to talk about his job. But I noticed his eyes were glued to my body in a way that wasn't normal between a mother and a son. When I was in my nightgown, he would linger longer, just standing there talking about anything to keep staring. When I mentioned this strange behaviour, he would get angry and say I had a dirty mind, that he just wanted to talk to me, that I was misinterpreting things. He said I was becoming paranoid, that it was the result of work fatigue and that I needed to rest more. He made me feel guilty for being suspicious of him, for seeing evil where he insisted there was none. One night he came home a bit drunk and tried to sleep in my bed. He said he was scared, that he had a horrible nightmare and he couldn't sleep alone. I let him lie down thinking it was temporary, that he would go back to his room the next day. But during the night I felt him moving strangely, pressing his body against mine, putting his hand on my waist, on my leg. When I woke up, startled, and asked what he was doing, he pretended to be in a deep sleep. The next day at breakfast, when I brought it up, he said I must have dreamed it, that none of that happened, and that I was confusing dreams with reality. He said it was common for people who work a lot to have realistic nightmares, and that I needed to take better care of myself. He made me doubt my own memory, my own sense of what had occurred. I started to be afraid of my own son, but at the same time I felt guilty for thinking these things about him. After all, he was my boy, the son I had raised with so much love, with so much sacrifice. How could I suspect something so horrible? How could I imagine that my own son was having impure thoughts about me? I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that the heavy work was driving me crazy, that I needed to stop seeing evil where it wasn't. I started to avoid being alone with him at home. I always found something to do when he was nearby. I started locking my bedroom door, something I had never done before. I changed my bathing routine, getting dressed in the bathroom instead of my room. But all of this just made me even more anxious, because I couldn't understand why I was taking these precautions against my own son. But then came the day that changed my life forever, that split my existence into a before and after. It was a Monday morning, March 15th, 1998. The day began normally, just like any other. I woke up at 5 a.m. as always, prepared breakfast, packed my lunch and got ready for work. Leo was still asleep when I left the house. It was a warm summer day, but with a nice breeze that made the morning pleasant. I arrived at the factory at the usual time, clocked in, sat at my sewing machine and started working. I was finishing a batch of women's clothing that had to be delivered before lunch. I remember I was focused on the work, trying to get the order done on time, when suddenly I felt a terrible pain in my head, as if someone had hit me hard on the back of the neck with a hammer. The pain was so intense that my vision immediately went black. I felt the floor spinning under my feet, a horrible sensation that everything was swirling around me. I tried to hold on to the machine table, but I couldn't. The last thing I remember is falling from my chair, hearing the noise of the other machines stopping, and women shouting, rushing in my direction. After that, a total blackout. I was at the factory, at my regular sewing machine, finishing a batch of women's clothes that had to be delivered before noon. Suddenly, I felt a terrible pain in my head, like being hit with a hammer. My vision went dark. The floor spun, and the last thing I remember is falling from my chair. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed with a bunch of machines hooked up to me. The doctor explained I'd had a stroke, a cerebral hemorrhage. He said I was too young for it, that it usually happened to older people, but that the stress from work and my life had contributed a lot. The left side of my body was completely numb. I couldn't properly move my left arm or leg. That's when my life descended into a full-blown nightmare. I needed help for everything. To shower, to get dressed, to use the bathroom, to eat. Julian, who was 22 at the time, offered to take care of me. He said he'd give up everything, that he would dedicate his life to looking after me because I had dedicated my entire life to him. At the time, I was so touched by his dedication. The first few days at home were normal. He helped me with care, took me to the bathroom, fed me, helped me bathe. I felt so grateful to have such a devoted son. But then the changes began. First, he said he couldn't let anyone else take care of me because only he knew how to do it right. He sent away the woman the social worker had arranged to help me a few hours a day. Martha was a woman in her 50s, very kind, who came 3 times a week to bathe me and do basic physical therapy. She had experience caring for stroke patients, knew how to handle the paralysis, and was gentle and respectful. But Julian started finding faults with her. He said she was careless, that she wasn't doing things properly, that she was hurting me during the exercises. He came up with so many complaints that the poor woman eventually quit. After that, he began saying I was very dirty, that I needed longer baths, that he had to clean me better, because no one else would do it with the necessary care. The baths that used to last 10 minutes with Martha started to last more than an hour with him. He claimed that a paralysed person accumulates grime in places normal people can't even imagine, that if not cleaned properly it could cause a serious infection, that I could even die if I didn't have adequate hygiene. His hands started to linger on certain parts of my body, especially my breasts and private area, always with these excuses of deep cleaning. When I complained that it wasn't right, that it didn't need to take so long, he said that's just how it was, that people who couldn't move needed to be cleaned more meticulously, that I didn't understand anything about medical care. He said he had researched hygiene for bedridden people online, that specialised sites recommended meticulous cleaning, and that I should be grateful he had the patience to do it. I tried to argue, but he always had a ready answer, a medical justification for every disgusting thing he did. I started to realise something was terribly wrong when he began touching me in a way that had nothing to do with cleaning. They were lingering touches, touches that affected me in a way that left me with a mix of disgust and terror. He would run his hand over my breasts in circular motions, claiming he was checking for lumps, that paralysed women had a higher risk of cancer due to poor circulation. He touched my intimate area with his fingers, inserting them where he shouldn't, always saying he was cleaning secretions, that he was checking for infection. But there I was, dependent on him for everything, unable to even get out of bed on my own. What could I do? My left side was completely lifeless. I couldn't even push him away with my right hand because I had no strength. It was like being trapped inside my own body, seeing and feeling everything happening to me, but unable to react. The feeling of helplessness was desperate. It left me in a state of panic, but it was no use screaming because there was no one to hear. The situation kept getting worse in such a gradual way that it made me question if I was losing my mind or if it was truly happening. He started controlling everything in my life, the visits I could receive, the medications I took, the food I ate, the shows I watched on TV. He claimed it was for my own good, that he knew better than anyone what I needed, that as my primary caregiver, he was responsible for all decisions related to my health and well-being. He isolated us from the world completely. He wouldn't even let the neighbours in to see me. When someone showed up at the door, he would answer and say I was sleeping, or that I was in pain, or that the doctor had recommended absolute rest. He always came up with a different excuse to keep people away. In time, everyone stopped coming, believing that I truly needed isolation to recover, and the abuses kept escalating day after day until it reached a point you can't even imagine what this monster was capable of doing. But wait, before jumping to the end of this horrible story, I have to start at the beginning of my life, because otherwise you won't understand how a son can turn into a monster like this. How a person you raised with so much love can transform into such a cruel creature. After I left the hospital, completely dependent on him for everything, that's when the true nightmare began. What I thought was the care of a devoted son turned into the most disgusting thing a mother can go through. It was as if he had been waiting years for that opportunity, as if my paralysis was exactly what he had wanted. In the first weeks at home, while I was still adjusting to the new reality of not being able to move properly, he said he needed to examine me every day to see if I wasn't developing bed sores from lying down too long. He said he had researched care for bedridden people online, and that people who stay in bed for a long time could develop horrible wounds if not cared for properly. He even showed me some impressive photos of infected bed sores that he had printed out. He said that could happen to me if I wasn't taken care of properly. I believed him, didn't I? He was my son, the only person I had in the world. Why would I doubt him? He seemed so concerned about me, so dedicated. He spoke with such authority about the medical risks I faced. But these examinations started to last longer and longer, and his hands began to go to places that had nothing to do with caring for bed sores. He examined every inch of my body, said he had to check everything, that bed sores could appear anywhere. He started saying that my breasts looked different, that they seemed swollen, and that he needed to massage them to improve blood circulation. He said he had read on specialized sites that women who stay in bed for a long time can have problems with breast circulation, and that massage was essential to avoid serious complications. His hands stayed there for a long time, squeezing, moving, making movements that left me with a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach, a mixture of disgust, fear, and confusion. When I said it was hurting or that I didn't like those touches, he replied that it was like that at first it always bothers you, but that later your body gets used to it and even improves. He said I couldn't be selfish, that he was sacrificing his time to take care of me, that I had to cooperate with the treatment if I wanted to recover. He said this with a conviction that made me doubt my own feelings, made me think that maybe I was misinterpreting those touches. The first real incident, the one that marked the beginning of the more serious abuses, happened during a bath on a Thursday afternoon. He said I was very dirty down there and that he needed to clean properly, or else I would get a terrible urinary infection that could kill me. He started touching me in a way that had nothing to do with cleaning. He inserted his fingers where he shouldn't, saying he was removing accumulated grime that I couldn't remove myself because of the paralysis. I tried to close my legs, used all the strength I had on the right side of my body to try to protect myself. But he held me tight and spoke in that falsely affectionate voice. "Mum, relax. I'm your son. There's nothing wrong with this. You gave me baths my whole life when I was a child, cleaned my bottom, taught me about hygiene. Now it's my turn to take care of you." The comparison was absurd, disgusting, but he spoke with such a naturalness that for a moment it made me question if I was exaggerating. From then on, the baths turned into a true torture, sessions of horror that I knew would happen every day and that I couldn't avoid. He would spend more than an hour cleaning me, always with these disgusting excuses about hygiene and health. He said that a paralyzed woman needs special care, that I didn't understand anything about medicine, that he had researched everything online and knew exactly what he was doing. And I was there, unable to move properly, dependent on him for everything, with no way to resist or escape. It was a feeling of despair that I can't explain, a mixture of terror, disgust, and helplessness. Then began the touches he called medicinal, always with the excuse that it was medical treatment. He said he had to massage my belly every day for my intestines to work properly, that paralyzed people have constipation problems and that only abdominal massage solves it, that if he didn't do that, I could have an intestinal obstruction and die. But his massages were strange. They started on my belly, but kept going down until they reached places that had nothing to do with the intestines. When I complained, he would get angry and yell, "Mum, do you want to get better or not? Do you want to die from an infection? I'm here trying to save you and you keep complaining." The psychological manipulation was the worst of all, worse even than the physical abuse. He repeated the same phrases every day like a mantra, which broke me inside. "Mum, you depend on me for everything. If I'm not here, who will take care of you? Who will feed you? Take you to the bathroom? Give you medicine? Who will have patience with someone like you?" He said this while he was touching me inappropriately, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, as if I should be grateful that he was there, that he was sacrificing himself for me. He said I was a burden to anyone else, that only he had the patience to take care of someone like me, that if he abandoned me, I would rot in a horrible nursing home where no one would care about me. He painted such a terrible picture of my situation that I was terrified just thinking about the possibility of being without him, even knowing that what he was doing to me was wrong. It was a sickening loop of dependency and fear. When I tried to fight back more, complain louder, or push him away with the hand that still worked, he'd start with subtle but highly effective threats. He would speak in that calm, controlled voice. "Mom, who's going to believe a paralytic over me? Everyone in this neighbourhood, in this whole city, knows me as the devoted son who gave up everything to care for his sick mother. If you start making up lies about me, they'll think you've gone crazy from the stroke, that you're having delusions." These words cut me like a knife, because I knew he was right. Who would believe me over him? He began to control every single detail of my life, every part of my routine. He no longer let anyone into the house, not even the neighbours who used to drop by. When Mrs. Jennings from next door would stop by and ask how I was, he would answer and say I was sleeping from the strong medication, that the doctor had recommended absolute rest, that visits made me agitated and hindered my recovery. The poor woman would leave, worried, thinking she was helping by not bothering me. He told everyone that I was very weak, that the doctor had recommended absolute rest, and that visits made me agitated and hindered my recovery. He isolated us completely from the world. I had no contact with anyone but him. The threats became clearer. He said that if I told anyone anything, he would put me in a nursing home and say I had dementia because of the stroke. He said he knew people who worked in those places and that I would rot there, being mistreated by strangers, eating bad food with no one to defend me. He painted such a horrifying picture that I was terrified just at the thought of it. Then came the day he decided to take care of my intimate needs in a way I will never be able to forget. He said I had been without release for too long and that it was bad for any woman's health, especially a paralytic. He said he had researched it and that doctors recommended special exercises for women in my situation. When I understood what he was about to do, I tried to scream, but he covered my mouth and said, No one will hear anyway, Mum, and even if they do, they'll just think you're screaming in pain because of the paralysis." From that day on, my life became a total hell. He established a horrific routine. In the morning, the bath with the disgusting touches. In the afternoon, the physical therapy he invented, which involved him touching me all over. At night, the special care that left me in a state of shock, all always with these excuses about health and medicine, as if he were doing me a favour. During the diaper change I needed because of my paralysis, he would take an absurd amount of time cleaning me, always touching where he shouldn't, always with the excuse that he was keeping me clean and healthy. He said that if I got an infection from filth, I could die, and that he wouldn't let that happen because he loved me so much. The worst part was that he did all of this while talking about love. He would say, "Mum, I do this because I love you. Because you are the most important woman in my life, because I can't live without you." He mixed declarations of love with disgusting acts as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I couldn't comprehend how a person could talk about love while doing such a thing. He also started giving me medicines that weren't the ones the doctor had prescribed. He said he had bought special vitamins to make me stronger, but I suspected they were drugs to make me more sleepy and less resistant. After taking these vitamins, I would feel more limp, more confused, without even the strength to properly scream when he abused me. The first full sexual violation happened on a night I will never forget. He came to my room after midnight, drunk and crying, saying he was suffering so much because he didn't have a girlfriend, that no woman wanted to be with him because he dedicated all his time to taking care of me. He said I had an obligation to help him because it was my fault he couldn't get a girlfriend. What happened after that was so horrific that to this day I wake up screaming from nightmares. After that night, he said that now we had a special relationship, that I was more than a mother to him, that we were a couple, and that no one could know because people didn't understand true love. He said that what happened between us was a thing of God, that it was destiny, that the paralysis had happened for us to be closer. His madness knew no bounds. Answer me honestly. Do you think a mother has an obligation to forgive a son, no matter what he does? I have a very controversial opinion about this. Tell me in the comments what you think, because what you're about to hear now about the years that followed will make you understand why I think this way. What began on that cursed night became a routine of horror that lasted for years and years. Each day that dawned was one more day of torment, one more day that I prayed for God to take me from this suffering soon. Julian turned my life into a prison where I was a prisoner in my own body, and he was the cruelest jailer you can imagine. Every day, without exception, he repeated the same abuses, always with those disgusting excuses of care and hygiene. In the morning, when he woke me for breakfast, he would already start running his hands over me, saying he was checking if I had slept well, if I hadn't developed skin wounds during the night. But his checks were pure evil, disguised as medical care. During the bath, which happened every day in the late afternoon, he would spend over 2 hours cleaning me. He said that a paralytic needed extra hygiene, that if he didn't do that, I would rot from infection. But I knew it wasn't about cleaning at all. It was him satisfying his sick desires, using my body as if it were a doll. I tried to resist, but my left arm wouldn't obey, and my left leg was dead. I depended on him even to go to the bathroom. The physical therapy he invented was another moment of terror. He said he had studied on the internet the exercises I needed to do, not to completely lose my movements. But his exercises included him touching me all over, forcing me to make movements that had nothing to do with stroke recovery. He manipulated my body as he pleased, always saying it was for my own good, that if I didn't do that, I would be paralyzed for the rest of my life. The night was when the worst happened. He said I needed special relaxation to sleep well, that a woman with a neurological problem had to have tension relief, or else she could have another stroke. And then he would do things to me that to this day make me feel sick just remembering them. I tried to pretend I was asleep, but he would say, "No use pretending, Mum. I know when you're awake and when you're asleep." I tried to ask for help in every way I could. When a neighbour passed in front of the house and looked through the window, I tried to make signals with my eyes, tried to move my head in a way that showed desperation. But he was always nearby, always controlling everything. If he noticed I was trying to get attention, he would come close and say loudly, "Mum is in a little pain today, isn't she? But I already gave her the medicine. She'll get better soon." When the phone rang, he would answer it. He always told everyone that I couldn't talk because I was very weak, that the doctor had recommended voice rest. If they insisted too much on talking to me, he would bring the phone to me, but stay right by my side, listening to every word, making a nasty face if I tried to say something that could raise suspicion. I was even afraid to say help, because I knew he would make me pay for it later. He controlled all the medicines I took. Besides the ones the doctor had prescribed for the stroke, he gave me others that he said he had bought at the pharmacy to complete the treatment. I suspected they were medicines to make me more docile, more confused, because after taking them, my mind would get very muddled, unable to think straight, without even the strength to scream when he abused me. The visits were cut off one by one. First, he said I couldn't receive my friend Sarah because she talked too loud and it affected my blood pressure. Then he said the people from the church couldn't come anymore because I was very sensitive to crowds. He kept making up excuses for each person until there was no one left. We were completely isolated from the world, just him and me inside that house that became my personal hell. I tried to resist in various ways. Sometimes I pretended I was in a lot of pain to see if he would stop, but he said pain was normal in someone who had had a stroke and that what he was doing would help improve it. Other times I tried to cry, hoping he would have a little pity, but he said crying was also a symptom of a neurological problem and that I would get better with time. Once I managed to get the phone in secret and tried to call emergency services, but my speech was a bit slurred because of the medicines he gave me, and the woman on the other end couldn't understand properly what I was saying. When he arrived and saw the phone in my hand, he became furious. He said that if I did that again, he would tie me to the bed and tell everyone I was having outbursts because of the stroke. The years went by, and I lost hope that someone would one day discover what was happening. He had managed to build a perfect image of a devoted son. The neighbours praised him, said he was an example of a son who gave up his life to take care of his sick mother. When he went out to run errands, everyone he met would speak highly of him. How could anyone suspect a person with such a reputation? He also became increasingly bold. He started taking me to my medical appointments and would be present during every examination. He wouldn't let the doctor examine me alone. He'd say I got too nervous without him there, that I could have another stroke if I got agitated. The doctors thought this was normal. They even praised his dedication. No one imagined that he was there to control what I said during the consultations. When a doctor asked how I was doing, he would answer for me before I even opened my mouth. He would say I was making great progress, that I was eating well, sleeping soundly, and doing my physical therapy. If a doctor insisted on speaking to me directly, he would say, "Doctor, she sometimes gets a bit confused because of the stroke, but I write down everything that happens at home and can give you a better report." But one day, after almost 8 years of living this hell, something happened that changed everything. My neighbour next door, Mrs. Cooper, was at home on sick leave. So she was home all day at a time when she would normally have been at work. On that very day, I couldn't take it anymore and started screaming in desperation while he was abusing me. I screamed with a strength I didn't know I had. I screamed for help until my voice gave out. Mrs. Cooper heard the screams through the thin wall separating the two houses. She later said she had never heard a scream of desperation like that it sounded like someone being tortured. She became worried and came knocking on the door to see if everything was okay. Julian answered the door completely calm. He said I was having a pain crisis because of the paralysis, that he had already given me medicine and that I was feeling better. But Mrs. Cooper wasn't convinced. She insisted on seeing me. She said she wanted to be sure I was okay. He tried to stop her, but she pushed the door open and came inside. She found me in bed, covered in sweat with hand marks on my neck, my eyes red from crying so much. She immediately realized something was terribly wrong, especially because I had a desperate look, trying to say something she couldn't understand. Mrs. Cooper said she was going to call emergency services, that I needed to go to the hospital. He tried to convince her it wasn't necessary, that it was just a normal crisis, that I always got like that when I was in pain, but she didn't listen and called 911 anyway. While we waited for the ambulance, she stayed by my side, holding my hand, and I tried to mouth "help" with my eyes because my voice wouldn't work. At the hospital, the doctor who treated me noticed something strange. He said I had signs of very high stress for a person who was supposedly being well cared for at home. He asked if I was feeling any different pain, if something was happening at home that could be making me agitated. Julian, as always, answered for me. He said it was normal for someone with a neurological problem, but the doctor insisted on examining me alone. He told Julian he needed to do some procedures and that it was better for him to leave the room. He tried to resist, but the doctor was firm. It was the first time in 8 years that I was alone with a person who could help me. When the doctor began the examination, he noticed signs on my body that didn't match the care I was supposedly receiving at home. The doctor asked if someone was hurting me, if I was being mistreated. I tried to speak, but I was so nervous that the words wouldn't come out right. So he asked if I could nod my head to answer yes or no. When he asked if someone in my family was hurting me, I managed to nod yes. When he asked if it was my son, I confirmed again. The doctor called the hospital social worker and a psychologist. They came to talk to me and gradually managed to understand what was happening. I told them everything I could, even with my speech a bit slurred, trembling with fear. I told them about the abuse, the touching, the threats. They were horrified, but they believed me. When they went to confront Julian, he denied everything with the greatest coldness in the world. He said I was having delusions because of the stroke, that it was common for people with neurological problems to make things up, that he was a dedicated son, and that those accusations were absurd. He said I was being ungrateful after everything he had done for me, that he had sacrificed his life to take care of me. He was so convincing that for a moment I thought people would believe him. He spoke with such assurance, such tranquility, that it almost made me doubt my own version. But the social worker said they would do other, more detailed examinations on me, and that if they discovered any sign of abuse, they would call the police immediately. I know this story is heavy, but I bet many of you won't have the courage to hit the like button on this video. Go on, prove me wrong, hit that like. Let's see if you really have courage, because what you're about to discover now about what happened after these examinations will shock you even more than everything I've told you so far. The examinations they did on me at the hospital confirmed everything I had said. The forensic doctor found clear signs of recent and old sexual abuse, marks on my body that proved I was telling the truth. When they showed the results to Julian, he continued to deny it, but now he could no longer maintain that act of a devoted son. The mask had fallen, and everyone could see the monster he truly was. The police were called, and he was arrested on the spot. They took him away in handcuffs from the hospital while he shouted that I was crazy, that I was making everything up because of the stroke, that he was going to sue everyone for defamation. But it was no use shouting any more. The evidence was there on my body, marked by years of abuse, and no one could deny the reality. I stayed in the hospital for almost 2 weeks while they decided what to do with me. There was no one in my immediate family to take care of me, and I was terrified at the thought of having to go to a nursing home or some place where I didn't know anyone. But then a miracle happened that I will never forget. My cousin Helen appeared, a distant cousin of my father that I didn't even remember existed anymore. Helen had heard about the case through a friend who worked at the hospital. She came to see me and said that even though we hadn't spoken for more than 20 years, she couldn't let a relative go through a situation like that alone. She said she had a house with a room on the ground floor, that she could take care of me, that she wouldn't leave me helpless. When I heard those words, I cried for the first time in relief after years of crying only out of despair. Helen's house was in a more distant neighbourhood of Augusta, on a quiet street full of trees and modest houses. She had adapted the room for me with support bars in the bathroom, a lower bed so I could sit alone, and a wheelchair for me to move around the house. For the first time in 8 years, I was in a place where I could be sure no one would hurt me. The first days at Helen's house were strange. I was so afraid that any noise made me jump. When she came close to help me with something, I would automatically flinch, expecting to be attacked. My body had ingrained the fear so deeply that even those who wanted to help me scared me. She had the patience of an angel with me. She spoke softly, moved slowly, always warning me before touching me. The first thing Helen did was take me to a physical therapist named Melissa, who had an office nearby. Melissa was a woman in her 40s, with short hair and a firm but caring manner. When Helen explained to her what had happened to me, I saw that she became outraged. She said she would do everything to help me regain my movements, that I deserved to have my independence back. The first physical therapy sessions were difficult. My body was too tense, locked by fear and trauma. Melissa explained that this was normal, that people who have suffered physical abuse usually have a very contracted body, as if it were always defending itself from an attack. She started slowly, just with breathing and relaxation exercises, teaching me to trust my own body again. But Melissa wasn't just a physical therapist. She became my confidant, my friend, my impromptu therapist. During the sessions, she would let me talk about everything that had happened, listen to me without judgment, and help me understand that none of it had been my fault. She said the stroke wasn't God's punishment, that I didn't deserve to have gone through that suffering, that I was a survivor, not a victim. After about 3 months of physical therapy, something happened that shocked me. During an exercise trying to reach an object Melissa had placed on the table, my left hand moved by itself for the first time since the stroke. It was just a small movement, the fingers closing a little, but I started crying with emotion. Melissa also cried with me and said, "See, Abigail, your body is coming back to life." From that day on, the exercises became more intense. Melissa explained that my brain was creating new connections, that the movements would return gradually if I didn't give up. It was hard, painful work at times, but each small step gave me more hope. First, some movement returned to my fingers, then to my wrist, then to my elbow. My leg also started responding better. Helen also took me to a psychologist, Dr. Harrison, who worked with people who had suffered severe trauma. She explained that I had 2 traumas to process: the stroke that changed my life in an instant and the years of abuse that followed. She said it would be a long process, that I had to be patient with myself, that healing from trauma doesn't happen overnight. The sessions with Dr. Harrison were fundamental for me to understand many things. She explained that what Julian did to me had a name: sexual violence, abuse of a vulnerable person, false imprisonment, that it wasn't care or love or anything that resembled it. He had used my physical dependency to satisfy his sick desires, and that this was a serious crime, no matter if he was my son or not. With time, I came to understand that I wasn't to blame for anything that happened. I wasn't to blame for having had a stroke. I wasn't to blame for having become dependent. I wasn't to blame for having raised a son who turned into a monster. Dr. Harrison taught me that victims of abuse always feel guilty, but that this guilt isn't real. It's just a way the mind finds to try to understand a situation that doesn't make sense. A few months after I started treatment, the most exciting day of my recovery happened. Melissa said she was going to try to make me walk alone, just with the support of a cane. I was terrified of falling, but she said, "Trust me, Abigail, you're ready." And indeed I was. I managed to take about 3 steps alone, trembling but firm. Helen was there watching and cried so much I thought she was going to have a fit. Walking alone changed everything in my life. I no longer depended on anyone to go to the bathroom, to get a glass of water, to reach the window and look at the street. It might seem silly, but for someone who had been unable to move for years, each movement was a huge achievement. I spent hours practicing walking around the house, strengthening my legs, recovering the balance that the stroke had taken away. With physical independence returning, I started thinking about what to do with my life. I could no longer work at the textile factory. My body wouldn't stand being hunched over a machine for hours. Dr. Harrison suggested I look for some activity that gave me pleasure, a way to restart my professional life without much physical effort. It was Helen who suggested the medicinal herbs course. She said, "You always had a knack for taking care of plants. When you were young, you knew how to make teas for everything. Your mother taught you a lot about home remedies." She said there was a woman in the neighbourhood who gave a basic course on medicinal plants and that I could learn more about it and maybe even work with it in the future. The course was a wonderful discovery. I learned about dozens of plants, their effects, how to prepare teas, homemade ointments and syrups. The teacher, Miss Carmen, said I had a gift for dealing with plants, that my hands were good for making remedies. It was the first time in a long time that someone had praised an ability of mine, which made me feel useful again. While I was recovering and rebuilding my life, the case against Julian was proceeding in court. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison for rape of a vulnerable person, false imprisonment and mistreatment. I thought that finally justice had been done, that he would pay for everything he did to me for so many years. But what I didn't imagine is that the American prison system can be a joke. Now comes the part where many people will judge me. When I found out that he had been released from prison for good behaviour after only 3 years, I made a choice. Do you think I was wrong not to have reported him again when he tried to contact me? What would you have done in my place? Because what happened after that will show you that sometimes life does justice in a way that we don't even expect. 3 years after he was released, I was completely recovered and getting on with my life. I had set up a small natural products store in a commercial space near Augusta Square, right in the centre of town. I sold medicinal herbs, teas, homemade ointments and syrups that I prepared myself. The business grew so much that I couldn't handle it alone. I had to hire a young woman named Sarah who helped me with sales and loved to learn about medicinal plants. My store became known throughout the city. People came looking for remedies for everything: headaches, insomnia, stomach problems, depression, anxiety. I guided everyone on how to use the right plants, taught them how to make teas at home, and gave advice on natural health based on decades of experience and study. I had become a reference on the subject. I earned my money honestly and was independent again after so much suffering. The routine of the store was a delight. I woke up early, had coffee with Helen, walked the 4 blocks to the centre, opened the store at 8 in the morning, organised the dried herbs in the jars, prepared the ointments of the day, and attended to my regular customers who now came to talk to me about life besides the remedies. It was a simple life, but full of purpose and meaning. Helen continued living with me, but now we were more like sisters than a cousin taking care of a sick cousin. She helped me in the store on weekends and took care of the house while I worked. She was my life companion, my confidant, my closest friend. We had built a good, peaceful routine full of true affection. For the first time in decades, I was truly happy. I had even found a boyfriend, Mr. George, a 68-year-old widower who frequented my store to buy chamomile tea for his nerves after his wife died. He knew my whole story, respected my past, and treated me with a kindness I thought I would never feel again in my life. We didn't live together, but we saw each other almost every day. We went to the movies, took walks in the park, and lived a nice romance of mature people who know how to value good company. George was everything Julian never was: respectful, caring, protective, without being controlling. He brought me flowers every Friday, helped me carry the heavy boxes from the store, and waited for me to close so we could go to dinner together at a simple restaurant nearby. Our relationship was based on mutual respect, trust, and true affection. That's how love should be. It was 20 years of complete peace, of reconstruction, of happiness that I never thought would be possible. I had managed to transform pain into purpose, helping other people through medicinal plants. I received several invitations to give talks about overcoming, about entrepreneurship in your later years, about how to start over after 50. I became an example in the city, the woman who knew how to turn things around after going through hell. My store prospered in a way I couldn't believe. I started selling at a small 3-foot counter and ended up occupying the entire room with floor-to-ceiling shelves full of jars with herbs, a refrigerator with homemade ointments, and a large table where I attended to people who came looking for more detailed guidance. I had customers who came from other cities just to buy my products. During these 20 years, I also created an informal support group for women who had suffered domestic violence. Every Tuesday after I closed the store, we would meet in the back room to talk, share experiences, and give strength to each other. Many women managed to get out of abusive relationships after participating in these meetings. It was my way of giving back all the help I received when I needed it most. The fame of my store spread so much that even a newspaper reporter came to interview me. A big article came out about female entrepreneurship in the golden years with my photo in the middle of the herbs, telling how I transformed a personal tragedy into an opportunity for a new beginning. I kept the article clipping framed behind the counter as a reminder that it was possible to succeed in life, even after going through the worst. But then, on a Thursday morning last year, I was in the store organising some jars of arnica ointment that I had just made when I heard a familiar voice asking for help. It was a trembling, weak voice, very different from the authoritative one that had terrorised me for so many years. When I turned to see who it was, I almost fell backward in fright. It was Julian, but not the strong, domineering man who had violated me for a decade. Standing at the door of my store was a broken man, thin with yellowish skin, walking with great difficulty, leaning on a cane. His hair was greying and thin, his eyes sunken, his clothes too loose on a body that had wasted away. He would have been almost unrecognisable if it weren't for that voice that still gave me chills. He saw me and started crying in that pathetic way that cowardly men cry when they're in need of something. He spoke with a choked voice. "Mum, I'm very sick. I need your help. The doctor said I have multiple sclerosis, that I'll become paralyzed if I don't have special care. Please, don't abandon me." He stood there at the door of my store, trembling, hoping that I would feel sorry for him, like a foolish mother who forgives everything. I looked at that man who had destroyed so many years of my life and felt a strange calm. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel pity. I felt an icy tranquility that I had never felt before. There he was, my tormentor, in the same situation I had been in one day, dependent, vulnerable, needing care, begging for help from someone he had hurt without mercy or pity. He continued talking, trying to move me. "Mum, I know I did wrong things in the past. I know I hurt you, but now I need you. I have no one else in the world. You are my only family. I'm living in a little room in a boarding house. I can't work anymore. I can barely take care of myself. Please forgive me and help me." He was using the same emotional manipulation as always, but now he had no power over me at all. Sarah, who was organising some herbs on a shelf, realised that something was happening and came closer. I whispered to her, "You can go to lunch. I'll handle this here." She left discreetly, leaving us alone. I didn't want witnesses for the conversation I was going to have with that man who was once my son. I listened to everything he had to say without interrupting, observing every detail of that body that was once strong and was now debilitated. He told me that the multiple sclerosis had started about 5 years ago, that at first it was just some numbness in the legs, but that it got worse until he lost part of his movements, that his hands were also compromised, that he had difficulty holding objects, balancing and walking long distances. He told me that he had been fired from his job in construction because he could no longer carry weight, that the disability pension money barely covered the room where he lived and his food, that he could no longer bathe properly by himself, that sometimes he went days without being able to have a decent meal, that he was afraid of falling and having no one to help. When he finished speaking, I took a deep breath and said with the firmest voice I could, "Now you know what it's like to be dependent on someone, don't you? You know what it's like not to be able to defend yourself, to have to trust that the person who takes care of you won't hurt you, won't take advantage of your weakness." I saw his face change colour. When he understood where I was going with those words, I continued speaking with a calmness that surprised me. "Do you remember what you did to me for 10 years while I was paralyzed? Do you remember how you abused me every day? How you threatened me? How you turned my life into a living hell? Do you remember that I begged you to stop and you said I had to be grateful because you were taking care of me?" He tried to interrupt me, but I raised my hand and stopped him. It was my turn to speak. He had to listen after so many years of silencing me. "For years, I begged you to have a little respect, a little humanity with me. You said I depended on you, that no one else would take care of me, that I had to accept everything in silence because it was a favour you were doing." Now it was his turn to be dependent. It was his turn to need care. I saw that he was getting desperate. Realising that I wasn't going to give in to emotional blackmail as he expected, he tried to change his strategy. "Mum, I was young, I was immature, I didn't know what I was doing. Now I understand that I was wrong, that I hurt you. I regret everything. I swear to God, I regret it." But I had heard that talk before, at the time of the trial. "You regret it because you need me now, not because you understood the harm you did to me. If you were healthy, with money and independent, you would never have shown up here asking for forgiveness. Your regret is self-serving, not true remorse." I said this, looking straight into his eyes without turning away my gaze for even a second. He tried his last card, the most disgusting one of all. "Mum, I know you're a good person, a person of faith, a person who forgives. You've always been like that. You've always had a big heart. You won't let your own son die of abandonment, will you? What will people think if they know you denied me help?" Then I laughed. I laughed in a way that even startled me. My son died a long time ago. What's in front of me is just a stranger who once did me a lot of harm indeed. And you know what people think of me today? They think I'm a brave woman who knew how to overcome a horrible trauma, who built a new life after 50. That's what matters. Now you're going to leave my store and never come back. You're going to look for some public nursing home, some charity, someone who is paid by the government to take care of you. Because free care, care of love, care of family. You lost the right to that when you decided to turn me into a sexual object for an entire decade." He left the store staggering, crying loudly, but I didn't feel even a bit of pity. After he left, I locked the door of the store, flipped the sign to closed, and sat down in the chair behind the counter. I cried a lot, but it wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a cry of pure liberation. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders all at once. Finally, I had managed to look my abuser in the eye and say, no. I had managed to take back the power that he had stolen from me during so many years of terror. I found out later through acquaintances who worked in social services that he ended up in a public nursing home, one of those the government maintains for people who have no family or money. I know that his life there is not easy, that he depends on the goodwill of overworked staff for everything, that sometimes he waits for hours to be attended to, that he eats bad food, that he sleeps in a shared room with other sick people. It's exactly the treatment he deserved. Today, at 72 years old, I can say with all certainty that I am a complete and fulfilled woman. I have my store, which works very well and gives me financial independence. I have Helen, who is family to my heart. I have George, who loves and respects me the way every woman deserves to be loved. I have health, energy, and many plans still to accomplish. I created an informal support group for women with disabilities that has already helped dozens of people report abuse, get out of toxic relationships, and rebuild their lives with dignity. Every week, I receive messages from women who manage to free themselves from horrible situations after participating in our meetings. It's my way of transforming pain into purpose, trauma into a life mission. My story proves that no matter how old you are, no matter how many traumas you've suffered, no matter how many times you've fallen, it's always possible to start over. The important thing is to never give up, to seek help when you need it, to believe that you deserve good things in life, that you deserve respect